Mr. Troy Mothershead, True Ames, how you doing?
Really good, man. Thanks for being here, Tupi.
Thank you for receiving me. I have had a lot of chatter going on my direct messages about fins and longboards. What's the overall, generally speaking, rule of thumb about fins and longboards?
Yeah, I think there's probably like three separate sectors I would put the fins in, Like we have put the middle neutral positive, the fin that can go in anything is the 4A. So we're standing in front of the whole 4A lineup here. And probably for a longboard, from a size perspective, it would start at 9 inch, goes to 9.75, and then 10.5. And so based on any of that sizing and length of board and intention, whether you're trying to turn more or nose ride better, you can kind of size up and size down. But like the rake and the template profile, the aspect ratio, the flex, all of those things in the 4A come together super well. Kind of where you can put it in any board, like any single fin out there, whether it's a shortboard or a longboard, can adopt the 4A. And so that's like oftentimes our starting point. So we put the 4A in the middle. And then I think on the other side would sort of be like a pivot fin. So something that stood more upright, like say the Heritage here, right? There's still always going to be a little bit of rake in the fin, but that's kind of your traditional pivot fin template. And more for kind of that stalled style turn or pivot turn, sort of where the naming convention comes from. So something that has a straighter rail, maybe a wider nose, wider tail, that's not necessarily intended to be really turned off of the rail as much as it is to sort of set up and pivot through the wave, and has a real high focus on nose riding. There's just a ton of surface area there, right? From base to tip. So that category has a few different fins in our line. The Yater Apocalypse is a really cool one. This kind of has slightly more curve to it and is almost in some ways kind of a blown up 4A, or maybe you could say the 4A is a shrunken version of that. And then there's also the Tyler Warren Pivot, which is kind of in that same category. And any of these things are sort of just like profile differences and different base widths and tip tapering that can kind of like help support either, again, like more nose riding or maybe a slightly more turning. Something like the CI nose rider is new and fresh that we worked on with Wayno and Devin. And this thing was really cool because we just spent a ton of time figuring out and tinkering with it, right? It's got quite a wide base up in kind of sort of to the middle of the fin, which really locks you in on the nose. It's got a decent amount of curve, but it's still a pivot fin and relatively upright. But it really tapers into the tip, and that lets you, you imagine it in the water, kind of gets over on rail, and now a lot of this base is gone, and you're surfing off of this, right? You're turning off of the tip, and so this gives you the ability to swoop and actually have a little bit more freedom to kind of turn the board through. So that kind of like gets into maybe more of the performance end of like what a pivot fin could be. And then from there, on the kind of completely other side, you have a fin with a ton of rake. And I would say there's sort of a threshold that you cross at that point where all of a sudden the fin almost kind of acts almost more like a pivot fin in the hold sense, right? So like maybe one of these, like this is the Wayne Rich #3. We haven't been making a lot of these, but I kind of pulled it out. I mean, I was scuffed up. This was my personal fin, but so much rake here, right? And this is really kind of truly a nose riding fin. At only 9.5 inches tall, it probably rides more like a 10.5 because of how much rake and area there is. The difference being that like this fin now is going to be in the drive category, where it's like you get this thing on rail and you have so much fin behind you, you can feel the drag and the direction, and you can't really pivot out of it. Like you got to go with where the fin is taking you. There's not a lot of forgiveness in this, so it's kind of unique. Like I think you would want the board to sort of be built with the intention of riding a fin like this. Someone that comes to mind is Michael Takayama. I think a lot of his boards were working really well with a super swept back fin here, and um, I think there was like a design intention to ride the board with that. But that's always an option. Like I ended up using this quite a bit in some experimentation and working through board design with Wayne Rich on our mothership model, because I kept trying to figure out how to get it to nose ride a little bit better and compensate for kind of what maybe the shape was lacking. We eventually got it to the place where I wanted it, so I'm riding either the Highliner or the 4A in there. But it's like across that spectrum then, right? You can kind of work all sides and all within it, depending on your goal and what you're trying to do with your board. So that's like, it always starts with the surfboard and how the surfboard is built, length, width, bottom contour, obviously profile and outline, and so you can, and then from there you can experiment. So like even with a big, like I said, hey, maybe the Heritage goes in a big wide, tail, big wide nose board. Like you could ride a 4A in it. You could ride a 10.5-inch 4A. You could go, okay, here's a baseline. Do I want it to turn better? Do I want it to nose ride more? What am I losing? And then the fin can help complement maybe what the board does or does not have. That's also not to say that like there's likely a magic combination for every board. I think if the shaper had a specific intention for, the way that board should ride, then there is likely a fin that's kind of best fit. And then you tailor from there. So
let me ask you, you are one of California's elite longboarders. What's the size of the longboard that you are riding right now?
Yeah, I ride a 9.6, and I've kind of always lived in like the 9.5 to 9.7 range for like my go-to, everyday longboard. I prefer, and I think this came out of spending a lot of time in Australia, especially up in Noosa. I really like that wide point back, kind of, hipped out, narrow nose longboard. I think the reason is because we, say Rincon as an example, like a more hollow faced wave. I feel like that design and that narrower nose just gives you more control and freedom to be deeper in the pocket on the wave. I think the kind of more classic California nose rider that's got a bigger nose is really good for like a Sano or a Cardiff or maybe even a C Street. But I just kind of liked that hot dogger feel and the way that felt, and became really in tune with it over the years. And so that's mostly what I ride. And in a board like that, there's a pretty decent amount of curve in it, and so it's nice because I feel like I can get that on rail more. I like to surf off the rail. I grew up in the high performance longboard era and rode shortboards at lowers my entire upbringing. And so it feels really nice to me to kind of have that feeling. I also think the wide point back, there's kind of like an apex in the rocker there. And so you can use that as kind of your control point, at the back half of the board. And so I lean towards riding something more like the 4A in that. It's kind of...
What size? 4A for that 9.6?
Yeah.
What size are you mostly using?
I use both a 10.5 and a 10-inch, kind of depending on where the waves are at and the type of wave I'm riding. The 10-inch is probably more the go-to. I feel like I have a little bit more freedom and control, less drag. The 10.5 can feel like a little bit big if the waves are a little slower, or I'm not getting a lot of speed out of the wave itself. Then the 10.5 kind of feels to be a little bit too tight or stiff. I just feel a little sluggish with it. So the 10-inch feels really nice. But I think if I'm feeling like I really want to nose ride, like really lock in, then the 10.5 is better because it's just that much more fin, in the wave, holding and locking it in, and a little bit more width in the base, just overall area, keeping the tail down.
Okay. Thank you so much, Troy. I
Yeah.
hope to see you in the water.
Totally.
Success.
Thanks,
You.
you.